Welcome back for our next in the Immune webinar series.
Hi.
This is the talk on the truth about carbohydrates.
Mm-hmm.
You asked for it now. So today we're going to talk all about carbs and how they affect your body in general, but also how they specifically can impact your immune system, which is important at this time. You know, I don't think anybody has any idea what's going on. There's no sort of pandemic.
And what?
Exactly. But so we're going to talk about how you can take control of your diet and the things that you're consuming that may be negatively impacting your immune system, because the last thing you really need right now is anything depressing your immune system.
Mm-hmm.
So to start, what is a carbohydrate? A resident diet expert.
Okay, so what's a carbohydrate? All right. So anything that can be broken down into simple sugars, that's a carbohydrate.
So a lot of people, like ourselves, when we say carbs, we mean sugar, and when we say sugar, we mean carbs. It's not necessarily exactly a one-to-one. They're not a replacement word. That's why there's different words. But when you're talking about carbohydrates, you are typically talking about some form of sugar.
Right. So there are, just a quick overview, there are three macronutrients. They are carbohydrate, fat, and the other one.
Protein.
Protein.
It's been a long day.
It has been a long day. And I don't talk about protein. Protein is a macronutrient, but it doesn't really fall into the energy substrate, which we're going to talk about. But yeah, those are those three macronutrients. Those can be broken down into subcategories, obviously, which can be broken down into even sub molecular categories at some point. But broadly speaking, of the three things, protein, fat, carbs, tonight we're talking about carbs. Fat is coming up, and protein will be somewhere down the road too. We'll talk about the role of protein.
Yeah, those don't tend to impact your immune system quite as much, so they're not high on our immune webinar list. But we will get to them eventually.
Yes, but carbs.
Carbs. Yes, so there are different types of carbs, which I'm sure all of you guys have heard about, like simple versus complex carbs. So simple carbs are carbs that turn into sugar quickly and easily.
Yes.
They tend to spike your glycemic index.
Mm-hmm.
So that's basically how fast does it turn into sugar in your bloodstream, and it spikes everything.
One of the simplest carbs is sugar.
Mm-hmm.
Table sugar.
Yeah, straight up sugar.
Duh.
Who would have thought?
And a quick note, because I get this question all the time from diet clients, agave syrup, honey, table sugar, what else? What other coconut sugar, sugar in the raw, beet sugar, brown sugar, blue sugar, whatever. The sucrose molecule is the sucrose molecule. That's that. End of story. Whether you get it from honey or you get it from agave or you get it from coconut, it makes no difference.
Mm-hmm.
Sugar is sugar is sugar is sugar.
Exactly.
There are some mitigating circumstances that make sugar not sugar, but we'll talk about those later, and it doesn't apply to straight sweeteners.
Exactly. Oh, yay. All right, I'm gonna make sure.
Someone else accidentally tripped in here.
That's my sister. Ooh, welcome. Hello.
Hi, Mel.
So but the other thing about the sugar stuff, the only difference between a lot of different types of sugar are the processing of the sugar.
Yes.
So like, for example, white sugar has been bleached, typically. It's the difference between white and brown, as molasses is brown. So sugar is typically brown, but they bleach it to make it white. And bleaching can leave residue in there that's not good for you.
Right.
So I'm very, we don't use a lot of sugar, but what sugar we do use, we tend to use organic cane sugar and like coconut sugar, because the processing is different, and I don't want like the formaldehyde or whatever other chemical they're using to be still in the products, which it can be with bleached stuff. Just like you shouldn't be using white coffee filters in your coffee machine. Coffee filters that are white have been bleached, so you may be consuming some bleach residue, which doesn't help your health in general or your immune system in particular.
Right. And that's another talk someday is going to be.
Yeah, we're going to talk about toxins soon too.
Yeah, microdosing of toxins and how to avoid those. But yeah, those are all good points. From the point of view of as a diet counselor, talking about what effect happens in your pancreas, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the insulin response to sugar? Your pancreas doesn't know the difference between white sugar and brown sugar.
Mhm.
But the doc makes a point. If you're going to have sugar, which you shouldn't, look at unprocessed, raw, organic. Certainly, we have a bag of unprocessed, organic coconut sugar because it is the least bad. That doesn't equal good, but it's the least bad for those things where we have to use sugar.
Yeah, like what we always say is like, if you're going to do something, do it right. So if you're going to use sugar, use the right kind of sugar. So that's why, like, you'll hear my dad say, sorry, Dad, because I know you're going to watch this later. He'll say, but the brownies are organic. And I'm like, I know, but it's still brownies. So they're still brownies. They're still not great for you. But organic brownies are better than like Panera's brownies, for example.
Right.
But it's still better not to.
Right.
But anyway, we'll get into that. So we talked about simple carbs. There's complex carbs. So simple carbs, like I said, spike your blood sugar, spike your glycemic index. The complex carbs, they take longer for your body to break down, so they don't spike everything the way that the simple sugars do.
Not as bad.
Not as badly. I mean, it will always spike your insulin a little bit when you eat sugar, period. That's just how it works, because you need, so this is a good time to talk about insulin. So the way that this stuff works is that when you consume sugar, your body does need sugar, like a little, but your body can create sugar. You don't need, that's right, Cleo. Your body can create sugar by itself. It's called gluconeogenesis. It's created in the liver.
Big word, almost a German word. It was so long.
I know. So when you can create your own sugar in your body, because your brain runs on glucose. So when you talk to people, they'll say like, well, she's saying hi to Papa. They'll say, but you need sugar. Your brain runs on glucose. And it's like, yes, but your body can make glucose from the things that you consume. You don't have to consume glucose.
Quick aside here. When we talk about all these sugars, we're talking about sucrose or fructose. Lactose is another one that we might have heard of. They get converted into the body at various efficiencies into glucose, which is the only kind of sugar your body can use for fuel.
Yes.
And as the doc said, there will be people who tell you that glucose is necessary for brain function. That's true. Glucose is necessary for liver function. That's true. Glucose is stored in the muscle fibers for quick burst energy. That's all true. What's not true is that you have to consume sucrose, fructose, or lactose to produce glucose. The liver can produce glucose all by itself from, guess what? Fat.
Exactly. Well,
Dietary fat.
Think about it. We're going to talk about different types of diets more towards the end of this. But when you look back at the way that our ancestors used to eat, think about back in the day when we were hunters and gatherers. Did we have sugar all year long? No. So there's no way that our bodies would have evolved to require straight glucose. We would have died off. And the people that didn't adapt probably did. So like, but so in the wintertime, think about it. Are you eating green leafy vegetables? Probably not. If not, if you're in the wintry areas.
As a hunter-gatherer.
As a hunter-gatherer. So there's no green leafy veggies. There's none of that kind of stuff. Hopefully you've stored some of the root vegetables you foraged in the fall. But otherwise, you're hunting game. So you're eating meat, which is made of fat and protein. That's what you're eating. So you have to be able to create your own sugar from those things, or you would starve to death every winter. And winter can last a long time depending on where you live. And then along that line, it makes sense that sugar makes you fat, which we'll get into. But think about it. When does the fruit come out? In the summer, in the fall. That's when fruit comes out. Mostly in the fall, right before that thing called winter. So the whole point is that you eat as much fruit as you can find because it's very perishable. You put on weight, which then you use throughout the winter, and then you come back out like a bear. That's the whole point. It's how we evolved. So that's why when you look at ancestral diets like primal and paleo, which again we'll talk about, they're very pro-eating like our ancestors, which means low sugar and higher fats and proteins.
And only eating bears.
No, bears chase Lucas.
Bears chase Lucas. So it's the funny thing about bears is Winnie the Pooh, famously one of our probably most famous and zoologically accurate bears, is famous for eating honey. But if you look at bears, so quick aside, my father was a bear expert, worked at Franklin Park Zoo in Boston.
Everyone has a bear expert.
Everyone has a bear expert in their family, don't they? So yeah, so my dad was a bear expert. So here's the thing with bears, you had to feed them cyclically. They are carnivores for 9 months of the year. For about 1 month of the year, they eat as much sugar as they can find. They intuitively know this, and that's when they'll break open hives. But the funny thing is that they'll break open beehives and eat the honey once it gets colder and the bees are dormant. They're not stupid, right?
Yeah.
Once the bees become dormant, then they'll break a hive open, eat the honey, but that's just before they hibernate. They don't eat it all year round.
Exactly.
They know better.
They know better, exactly. Well, and that's why we try to look at nature and how we evolved and where we came from, because that can inform how we are now.
Ancestral wisdom.
Exactly. Well, and some of the things that we have done to ourselves in the last 100, 200 years have been very, very detrimental to our health and our children's health and our children's health. So it starts to escalate, which we'll talk about too. Children's children. That's like a curse from Hook.
Yes.
Anyway, so yes, so that's what happens. So then going back to how sugar is processed in your body. So when you consume sugar, your body needs to put it away. The way that it does that is insulin comes and takes sugar by the hand and says, come with me. And it puts it away.
I don't want to go.
You have to go. So it takes it and puts it away. And what happens is that insulin is a little bit inflammatory. So what happens is that when you are constantly eating sugar, your insulin constantly has to be higher. And between the sugar and the insulin, they cause a very inflammatory effect. And so the way I like to describe it is that as your sugar and insulin are going through your body, they're going through your arteries and veins, the little highways in your body, to go wherever it needs to go. Well, essentially what happens is like Wolverine running down the hallways, scratching everything up. And what happens is that the inflammation is like the scratches, it's literally tearing up your arteries and your veins. And not ideal, I know. So what ends up happening is that when you get these gashes in the walls of your arteries and veins, your body has to fix those. So what it ends up doing is that it sends cholesterol.
HDL, baby.
So what happens is cholesterol, if you eat healthy, good fats, your cholesterol will be nice and puffy and fluffy. And what happens is it lands on top of it like a Band-Aid. It protects it. And like a Band-Aid, lets it heal before it can float off again. But one of the problems is that if you're eating a high sugar diet, you're probably also eating a poor quality fat diet as well, because they tend to go hand in hand, especially in processed foods. There are no processed foods that really have healthy fat in it. Processing destroys good healthy fat. So there's really, it doesn't matter if you got a coconut almond bar or whatever, it's still processed.
Probably not.
It's probably not ideal. Unless they're doing cold pressed everything, which how are they making the thing in the first place?
In which case, most processed foods are processed in order to make them shelf stable. That's the whole idea. So to create a food that will sit on the shelf for some period of time.
And if your food doesn't go bad.
Yeah. Healthy fats they're really good for your body, but they're not very shelf stable. That's why you don't find them in commercial products and processed products.
Exactly. But so what happens is if you're constantly eating these low quality fats, your cholesterol will not be fat and fluffy. It'll be tiny and angry. And what happens is that it gets inside the cuts, the wound, if you will. So it's the opposite of a Band-Aid, like the fluffy, happy cholesterol. It's a Band-Aid. This tiny, angry stuff gets inside of it more like dirt, and it keeps it open. So the inflammation of the area continues unimpeded, and then these little guys get in there, and then they start to build on each other, and then suddenly it gets big enough that it's a plaque. And what happens is 2 things can happen at that point. 1, the plaque may be so big that eventually it clogs an artery, and that's a heart attack.
Right.
So
or
a stroke.
Thrombosis or your stroke, yeah.
So what the other thing that happens is actually the thrombosis is when it breaks off. So it may be building up like a plaque on the wall or like mold on the wall, and then breaks off and goes off. That's more like a stroke. Heart attack tends to be here. Stroke tends to be other places. But honestly, a heart attack is basically the stroke of a heart.
Right.
So it's blocking the artery or vein. So then that prevents the blood from getting in, and you need blood very quickly through your organs all the time, or things start to die. And we all know that if you lose blood to your head for too long, which is not very long,
You end up looking like this.
Exactly. So that's what happens when you eat sugar. So why are we taking cholesterol meds?
So that we don't have to. So we can eat all the sugar we want? I don't know.
Exactly.
So to sort of experiment with this for yourself, if you'd like, take a look at your toothpaste. If you use one of the more commercial brands of toothpaste, you'll see that it has a statement on there by the ADA, American Dental Association. And it says, American Dental Association, good dental hygiene is part of reducing systemic inflammation, which has been shown to contribute to heart disease. So according to your dentist, inflammation can cause a heart attack. Mm-hmm. According to the AMA, cholesterol causes heart attacks, but don't let that get, just don't.
Exactly. So along that line,
inflammation.
So now you know how systemic inflammation is created, because think about it. It's not like it's just tearing up arteries in your arms. It's everywhere. It's in your entire body. And systemic inflammation is responsible for almost, if not every, chronic disease we have in this world, but specifically in the U.S. Yeah. Cancer, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, fibromyalgia, heart disease,
Hashimoto's thyroiditis,
any autoimmune disease. It's also behind some osteoarthritis. It definitely speeds it up.
Yeah.
It's chronic low immune system, everything, because
it may contribute to ALS. It certainly contributes to premature Alzheimer's and senile dementia.
Exactly. So it's implicated in a lot of things. So when people are like, oh, I want to cut out some carbs so I can lose weight, like that's like the least of your worries. Right. You should be doing it for health.
Sure.
Because what happens is that this unmitigated inflammation causes so much damage, and it can be a big problem, because what's supposed to happen is, like, say you get a cut. That's the sound the black belt makes. So what happens?
Where's Lucas?
So when you get a cut, though, you know when you get a cut, it gets red around it. That's inflammation. Rubor, tumor, calor, dollar. So it's supposed to get red. It's supposed to get hot. It's supposed to get itchy, and it's supposed to get raised and swollen. That's what inflammation is. Local inflammation is okay. It's there to help heal. But this chronic, unresolving, like it's just up and it stays up inflammation
and
is the problem.
Systemic. It's all over the body and affecting multiple systems.
And that's why, like, once you get diagnosed with, like, say, diabetes, you tend to be, that's why they're like, well, if you have diabetes, you're more likely to have a stroke and a heart attack and cancer and
50%, 50% more likely, by the way, if you have elevated blood sugar, 50% more likely to have a stroke or heart attack.
Mm-hmm. And then as far as, like, blood levels go, it does depend on who you talk to. According to medical doctors, anything over like 125 is like diabetes or pre-diabetes, but they keep lowering it. They kind of understand that it should be lower than that, but it's also an excuse to get you on medication sooner. Because if you're,
they did the same thing with cholesterol about 5 years ago.
Exactly, because the blood levels are relative and they can do whatever they want. And so what happens is that now you get diagnosed as pre-diabetic, and then they put you on like metformin or whatever sooner. And it's presumably to help you, but the problem isn't that you're metformin deficient. The problem is that you're not eating well.
Right.
You know, people talk about like, oh, well, you know, like my pain, I need to take Advil. Well, like, you don't have an Advil deficiency. Like, that's not a thing. We did not evolve to depend on medication. So this idea that medication is going to save us all is just a fallacy. It definitely has a place. Like, I will take antibiotics when I get strep throat, but like short of that, I'm not really interested in medication because it has so many side effects, etc. Anyway.
Hormones. May I speak about hormones for just a moment? Okay, so if we haven't talked you out of sugar yet.
Well, we're going to do some more.
Yeah, we've got a lot more. An important thing to consider too is that hormones are signalers in the body. They tell the body to do something. Most hormones are secreted as needed when called for in right amounts that are necessary when everything's working fine. Right. They're called for when necessary in the proper amounts. Insulin's a funny one though, because we can especially if you've spent a lifetime on a carbohydrate-based diet, which we all have because we were told to. We were told to. Don't feel bad. We were told to. Yeah, me too. I was on the highest carbohydrate diet you could imagine before I found all this out and stopped, which is now coming up on 10 years ago. So all that insulin gets pumped, and the pancreas is, if you think about it, your liver, which processes fat and filters things, is the largest internal organ. It's gigantic. The pancreas is a quarter the size of it. It's tiny. So already you can see the body's really much more built to handle fat than sugar. But the pancreas can run out of insulin over time. That's type 2 diabetes. But the other thing that happens is all this free-floating insulin, once it's super high blood sugar causes ketoacidosis, which is not ketosis, different thing. Ketoacidosis, which is dangerous. You may have known somebody who is type 1 or type 2 diabetes who was concerned about their insulin levels dropping too low and going into a diabetic coma. That's caused by ketoacidosis. But let's say we squirt enough insulin to prevent that. We digest that giant strudel, right? We're all
randomly
set.
Choosing desserts.
There's a lot of free-floating insulin floating through the bloodstream, and something has to happen to that. So what often happens with the hormones that can be dangerous is they get converted to something that's a bit more benign, and so the body can get rid of them or store them. Do you know what insulin gets turned into when we're done with it?
What does it get turned into?
It gets turned into estrogen. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with estrogen. Estrogen in the right body, in the right amounts,
Well, and
does some amazing stuff. Estrogen in the wrong body in high amounts does some terrible stuff.
it's called man boobs.
Moves.
Moves, for short.
Moves.
No, and
But
estrogen,
additionally,
too high estrogen in women will
cancers.
cause cancers and make it harder to lose weight.
Right.
It's not, you want to be, it's all about balance. Everything we always talk about is about balance.
Excessive estrogen in men causes us to have secondary sexual characteristics of women. In other words, the way you put on fat can
feminizing.
be feminizing. It competes with your testosterone levels, and let's face it, our sense of well-being and a whole lot of psychological and emotional things go into having a proper balance of estrogen to testosterone in both genders.
Yeah, women have testosterone too. We just don't have as much.
Some have more.
Some have more. There's, I remember there's a finger test, and like, it's supposedly if one of your fingers is longer than the other, it's more testosterone or estrogen, but I don't remember. There's something we talked about in school.
And if you want to bite one of those fingers off, you have a lot of testosterone.
Exactly. Exactly. But it's all about balance. And testosterone is really what revs you up and gives you the energy, and you put on muscle mass and stuff. The estrogen tends to hold on to fat a little bit more. Because think about it, female, we're supposed to be carrying babies. We need to be a little bit more fat than men because we need to survive. We only need a couple of them. We need a lot of us. For this, because if you remember, it all comes back down to survival of the species, and so it's all about
not the gender.
Not the gender. We only need a couple of them. so, so that's what it's. I hate you. So that's what it's about. It's all about surviving and adapting.
One last word on hyperestrogenization in both men and women. But especially men, what happens is the extra estrogen, now not only does it drive you to store more fat, but it gets stored, it's called aromatase, it gets stored in that fat. So then you have a problem with when you do start to break down that fat, you get this burst of estrogen, which tells you to put the fat back on. And you get into this cycle of having this inability to lose weight, because every time you start to lose weight, you put it back on because of aromatase estrogen. I guess sugar bad.
Yes, exactly. And then furthermore, what you'll find, like, and we're going to get to the immune thing in just a second, but the last thing I want to say before we hit the immune is that when you're eating a lot of sugar in the form of carbohydrates, you're going to, again, it'll push things out of balance. And another thing that it affects is the autonomic nervous system. So that's the part of the nervous system that you're not in control of. That's the one that's running in the background. It's just running the programming. And you've got the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So the sympathetic is the fight or the flight, and the parasympathetic is the rest and digest. And what can happen is that when you're eating too much sugar, it can throw off this balance. So then you can be like too amped up or too lethargic, or, you know, you go back and forth. In the end, it makes you very unadaptable to challenges, and your well, first of all, your neurological system needs to be functioning properly, because if it's not, it controls everything, so everything else gets jacked up. And then furthermore, we're starting to find out that along with like the bones. Everybody knows about like marrow creating white blood cells and stuff. That's leukemia when you don't have it working properly.
Work right.
But a lot of your nervous system controls your immune system, and a lot of your immune system is also in your gut. So you can see it's a 1-2 punch with the digestion.
It's a gut punch.
It's a gut punch. So basically, when you eat sugar, it is a gut punch. And what ends up happening is that when you consume sugar, for the 2 hours after consuming it, you reduce your immune function by 50% or more. I am sure it depends on the rest of your health status. If you're diabetic and stuff like that, I am sure the effects on you are more profound. And then after the 2 hours of depression, it takes 5 hours to get back up to 100%. So, and again, if you have like diabetes or something like that, I guarantee that that's longer. So you can see that if you are chronically consuming sugar at regular intervals throughout the day, you may have chronically impaired immune system function throughout the day. So this is one of the things we talk about with people in the office, is that when you feel like a cold coming on, there's some supplements you can take to try to help boost up your immune system to fight it off. But one of the things we also do is when you feel like you got that tickle in your throat or whatever, you're like, uh-oh, I'm getting sick symptom is, stop eating sugar. Don't eat sugar. Like no breads, no pastas, and don't even eat fruit. Don't eat any sugar.
Yeah.
Don't drink any alcohol, because alcohol also converts down to sugar, which we'll talk about. Don't do any of that night. Drink a lot of water, take your immune boosting supplements, eat fat and protein, and go to bed. Like,
right.
Don't do that, because what ends up happening is the sugar also, it feeds the bad guys. So it's especially good at feeding, well, it's good at all of them, but it's good with viruses too. So that's another reason you want to stay away. But the other thing it feeds is fungus.
Fun guy. I'm a fun guy.
So when
and yeast.
Okay, yeast is a fungus. Don't make me kill you. So yes, so also known as candida. So what happens is
I like candida.
Candidiasis.
Halloween candida.
So what ends up happening is what's it called when it's in your throat? I forgot.
Oh, I'm not talking about.
It'll come back to me.
Candida throatitis.
No. It used to be a big problem. Like sometimes people would have candida so bad that it would create a film across their throat, so they can't breathe or swallow or anything like that. It's bad. It's really bad. But most people end up getting a less severe version in their guts. So it's called candidiasis, and it's also, or candida infection. So what happens is that candida, along with E. coli and a bunch of other bad guys, live in your gut. But you also have good guys. That's what the probiotics are. They're in there too. So think of it like a garden. If you plant the good plants you like in that garden, they're taking up space, and there's not as much place for weeds to grow. Well, weeds will grow up, so you got to pull them out and then hopefully fill in the gaps so they don't come back. That's why you put down like mulch and stuff, is to try to prevent the weeds and things from coming up. So that's what you're supposed to be doing with your gut. But what happens is that when you're constantly eating sugar, you're killing your bad guy, or you're killing your good guys and feeding the bad guys. So it's like you're ripping out your tomato plants and then taking up the mulch and then just spreading out dandelions.
Poison ivy.
Poison ivy. Exactly. So you're just throwing everything out there, like whatever, I don't care anymore. And what happens is that when your gut flora is what it's called, when the bacteria in your gut, it's a microbiome. It's supposed to be again, it's all about balance. You're supposed to have some E. coli. It's okay. You just don't want to have too much E. coli. That's an infection. You want to have some candida, but not too much, because that's the yeast infection, essentially, of your gut. So you want everything to be balanced. And what happens is that as you become imbalanced from eating irregularly or eating things that feed the bad stuff and kill the good stuff, you'll become unbalanced. And when you start to get stuff like the candida, you tend to get really bloated after meals, especially when you eat carbs, because they're giving off all the gas from being happy. You're prone to yeast infections. Happy gas. You're prone to yeast infections. You're going to be tired. You're going to have a lot of symptoms because you've got these little parasites essentially sucking all your energy and stealing everything. So changing out your gut flora is not hard. Well, it's easy, but it's hard.
It's simple.
It's simple.
Yeah, it's simple, but it can take time, and it takes focus and dedication.
It takes 6 to 12 months, minimum.
So that would mean if you have a candida infection, if you suspect you have a candida, you would need to cease eating anything that feeds the candida. That means almost
All sugar.
carb, all simple carbs,
alcohol.
all sugar, all alcohol. Get it out of your diet and plan on that for 6 to 9 months.
Yes, because you need to starve it out, and fungus is very tenacious. It holds on.
It really does.
That's why it's so hard to get rid of mold in your house. It's harder to get rid of it in your body because if you mess up one day and have sugar, just takes one day to refeed them, and then it's like, like you're starving the castle and they get one shipment and they're gonna live again. Like, So we have protocols, for example, like the gut flora protocol, where you take herbs that specifically kill the bad guys, and then it's called weed, seed, and feed. So based on the garden analogy, you're weeding out the bad guys and then seeding it with good guys and feeding the good guys so they grow up. But it's this back and forth cycle, and it can take 6 to 12 months or longer, depending on how bad it is and how compliant you are.
Right. And the protocol, the supplementation is brilliant, but without a really dialed in diet, there's no point in doing it. You really got to get your diet.
It'll help a little, but
you got to get your diet nailed down.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many supplements I give you if you're undermining your diet. That's why we're talking about sugar, because it's one of the biggest underminers, as you can see. It affects every aspect of your health and way more than maybe you thought. And it's like, I know it's tough. Sugar's in everything, but when you have an issue, you really got to nail it down, because like I said, it only takes one donut, not even, to refeed this whole system and blow it out of the water, which we don't want.
Can I tell them about my first diet client?
Sure.
My very first professional diet client was a diet coach who himself was dealing with candida overgrowth. He'd done everything that he could to deal with it, but the education that he had was more about weight loss, and he hadn't really dealt with this kind of using food to counteract disease, which is actually, that's what I studied. That's the specialty I have, was to focus on health rather than just weight. And I helped him. It took a long time. It takes a long time. But we finally cleared him of the candida overgrowth. We used, the other thing we used is you can combat, the doc's already said this, you can combat bad bacteria, bad yeast with positive bacteria and positive yeast. And one way to do that is by using kombucha, which most probiotics have the right bacteria, but they don't contain yeasts. But kombucha, everybody heard of kombucha? It's a traditional Japanese tea that's fermented.
Typically not recommended if you're currently fighting the candida, because it can sometimes feed it. But
you want to be very careful. You don't. Yeah, we got him pretty far along, and then used kombucha towards the end. And what we had him do is make his own. I think it's hilarious. We had him make his own kombucha at home because it wasn't sweetened. I think it's ridiculous if you look at even in Whole Foods, the kombuchas that they sell there. Kombucha is, think about it. It is fermented tea. What happens when you ferment something to the taste of it, Thomas? Sauerkraut, right? Rotkohl. The sour, they become very sour. They become very bitter when you ferment them. And most Americans don't like those tastes. They're popular in other cultures, but they're not very popular in our culture. So what the manufacturers of kombucha have done is they take kombucha and they water it down, and then they add, guess what? Sugar to make it taste better, which is self-defeating. So but to the point, candida can be very difficult to attack, and it can take a long time, and it takes a tremendously strict diet to do it.
Exactly. I have a patient who, or I have a couple of patients, I should say, who struggle with candida, and until they decide to really nail it down, I don't think that they have a chance. But it's so hard.
No Snickers?
No Snickers, I know. But it's hard. Well, we had a person, and she was she was great. She did Steve's diet coaching, and she was like, but I love the little Hoods yogurt, or the Hoods. The Hoodsies, little Hoods ice cream with like the little wooden spoon. She's like, I want them. And he was like, okay, fine. If you change everything else and you just do that, you'll definitely be better off. So she did it, and then she lost a lot of weight. She was really thrilled. She felt better. And then one day she kind of looked at the ingredients. She's like, why am I eating this? And she just stopped. Then it was like, boom, all the weight was gone. Yep. It was crazy. Yep. Because that was enough to cause a problem. Because if you don't, it's kind of like smoking. If you go from a pack a day down to 2 a day, you're still smoking 2 cigarettes a day.
You're still addicted.
We can all agree that 2 is better than a pack, but you'll never break that addiction if you're still doing 1 or 2. You need to get rid of it all. So, exactly. So that is one of the reasons why we are very pro the primal and paleo diets and diets that are similar to them. They are low sugar, high fat with some protein. It's very much like what our ancestors ate for the reasons we're talking about. Because when you are eating too much sugar, you can have so many different problems. Like I said, you'll get to the point where you get diagnosed, but before you get diagnosed, you're going to have a lot of joint pain. You're going to have a lot of random muscle aches. You might get headaches or brain fog. You might have some mood issues, like you might get some blues, aka depression. A lot of people that are sad, especially randomly, it's because they're not handling their sugar very well. It can cause trouble with sleep. It can wake you up in the middle of the night. You can have trouble falling asleep. You'll get weird dreams.
Nasal congestion.
Nasal congestion, phlegm if you're coughing stuff up. We call it plum pit chi in Chinese medicine, where you have a feeling that something's stuck in your throat, but you can't cough anything out. That is very classic too much sugar. They call it phlegm in Chinese medicine. It's just that congestion. You'll get puffy. Like, it's just Chinese medicine, they talk about the flesh being governed by the spleen, which is the sugar, aka pancreas. So you get really puffy, that the inflammatory type of weight. That's all this pancreas stuff. And
does
yes.
we know that bad bacteria can be fed by sugar. Do viruses get fed by?
We already said that. Yes.
Sugar?
Good job remembering. It's the Alzheimer's from the sugar.
What are we talking about today?
I love you. Yes, viruses.
And avoid sunburn.
But yes, the viruses are fed by sugar too. Pretty much everything is. It's a very easy substrate. It's why they use sugar to culture things. So like if you've been seeing the COVID things with like the coughing on to the agar, it's sugar. It's an agar plate. It's a sugar plate. It feeds things. So like onto it and they see, does it grow? That's the whole point of it.
Turns out it does.
Yeah, and turns out that sugar is probably, again, this is all like, I'm not that kind of doctor. Sugar feeds cancer. It does. We know this. When they do experiments to grow cancer in labs, they grow them by feeding them sugar. We can talk about everything else, but sugar is what they feed cancer to make enough of it in a lab to test on.
I have a friend who is a cancer researcher at the Dana-Farber Institute. And I had remember several conversations with him over the years, and I said to him, when you isolate cancer cells and you grow them, because that's what they do, they isolate various cancers, they grow them to see how they grow, and then they attack them with various things to see how to attack them. So when you pull the cancer out, what do you feed it to keep those cancer cells alive? It's like, oh, it's sugar. It's sucrose. Direct sucrose is what they feed cancer cells to keep them alive. I said, so red meat causes cancer,
Right.
Not sugar.
Yeah, if red meat was that good at causing cancer, they'd put it on top of steak.
Now that's a false equivalency, and I know
Yeah.
it sounds groovy, but it's not. Red meat doesn't cause as much cancer as they say it does, but sugar is definitely bad for you. And
there's other things so when they do their red meat studies, we'll get into this another time. We don't have time tonight.
Protein.
The way that they count red meat is not accurate, and then how they cook it makes a difference. And is it grass-fed organic? Is it grain-fed? That there's so many things that go into it that they do not track. Right. So they can't say anything. They don't actually have the data.
Right. They set out to prove something. They created a study that would prove it rather than create a study that was open and fair.
Exactly. But
are there any good carbs?
There are good carbs. There are some carbs that.
Where are they?
These are the carbs that don't spike your insulin. They don't spike your glycemic index as much. So these are the ones that.
Can we talk about glycemic index?
We did.
Because I don't understand glycemic index.
Okay, you can go over it since you are confused.
So glycemic index, for anybody who doesn't know, glycemic index, a number is given to a food product based upon how quickly it converts from a carbohydrate into blood sugar. Right? So the faster it spikes your blood sugar, the higher the glycemic index. So you would imagine on a 0 for coconut oil, which has a 0 glycemic index, right? Or beef, which has a 0 glycemic index, all the way up to, whatever, a chocolate sundae. You would figure that the thing with 100, that painted in 100 would be table sugar.
Right? That should be the standard. It should be 100%, right?
It's not. Table sugar is at about 89. It's at 89 on the glycemic index. But do you know what's higher, Doc?
What?
Wheat toast. Wheat bread.
Mm-hmm.
Wheat bread is actually a higher glycemic index than table sugar. Why I always bring that one up is the irony of it is that there are people out there buying brown wheat, whole grain, all those words, that wholesome, whole grain, organic wheat bread, because that's better. But in fact, it spikes your blood sugar faster and higher than almost anything else you can eat. Why does it do that? There's a couple of reasons. First of all, the wheat. Second of all, the wheat is definitely
Yeah, wheat is a simple carb.
Absolutely, super simple carb. Spikes it hard. Most grains are, to one degree or another. Next, whole wheat bread. If you ever made whole wheat bread from whole wheat flour, that was just ground brown, unhusked wheat, it would taste a little bit like a mix between cardboard and cow pies. It's terrible. So what they have to do is you take this already high glycemic wheat and you have to add a whole ton of fructose to it. So you end up with a product at the end of the day that is going to just spike your blood sugar way. White bread, believe it or not, is better in that it doesn't spike insulin as much. Mm-hmm. So here's how good carbs work. How good carbs work is that they're complex.
Yeah, so they don't spike as much, so they cause less inflammation, etc.
And the thing that causes them not to spike is that they need to be.
It's having trouble with the zooming.
Your body has to process the sugar out of it. It doesn't just, like simple carbs, it doesn't just get absorbed out. It has to be processed. And the thing that usually mitigates the spike, the processing, is fiber. The more fiber that's attached to sugar, the better or lower the glycemic index is. For instance, this is the best example because they're called sweet potatoes, so you would expect them to be high in sugar. They kind of are.
Yeah, kind of.
They're so high in a soluble form of protein. Fiber. Soluble fiber. It's been a long day. Soluble fiber that the absorption into your bloodstream is very, very slow. So if you want carbohydrate in your diet, and we have carbs in our diet.
We have carbs, yep.
Sweet potatoes, because the fiber offsets the sugar. Plantains versus bananas. Bananas
are very high in sugar.
Right, but plantains, which taste relatively the same, are actually very high in fiber, particular kind of fiber called resistant starch, which the bugs in your gut that we were talking about, they love
the
resistant.
Good bugs.
Yeah, the good guys love resistant starch. Love it. It's what
they call a prebiotic. It's what feeds the probiotic, which is the bacteria that you're ingesting.
Potato starch, by the way, is a great prebiotic. So you can, if you're really worried about this, you can take like a teaspoon of potato starch in water before you take your probiotic.
Or you can just buy the one we sell, which comes with it. We'll see if it's an appropriate thing for you, but we sell one that has them combined, so it's a better form. Yeah. Most of them don't come with it, and even if they do, you got to be careful.
Right. So those are good. Those two, plantains, sweet potatoes, but many fruits are actually pretty high in fiber, and so they offset the sugar that's in them. And we have a list, don't we?
We do, which we'll show you in a second. But the other thing I wanted to say is, like, for example, oranges. Orange juice is just the sugar part of the orange. When you squeeze it all out and you don't eat the fiber part, which is all, the part that you're leaving behind, the pulp, you're going to have just straight up sugar juice. So when you talk to us, people go, "Oh, but I love my sugar juice." Like, no, stop. Like, that's one of the best ways to be off is to drink juice, because juice has no fiber in it, even if you're doing the one with the pulp, because it's all apart, it's not together. It can cause a problem. Like, if you insist on drinking juice, you should be diluting it with water. That, simply put, because then you'll drink less of it, which is always helpful. But
or have an orange.
Just have an orange. Exactly. Eat stuff the way nature intended. Don't the minute you start breaking it down into some other form, it's just not as good. It didn't
pre-digestion.
Exactly. It didn't come that way for a reason. But we do have a quick list for you guys.
You're gonna love this.
All right, I got a screen share here for you. This is the Primal Blueprint. Here, I'll scroll up. The Primal Blueprint shopping list. You can find this by just Googling Primal Blueprint shopping list PDF, and it'll come right up. So this is if you're following the primal diet. So the idea behind the primal diet is that you are consuming meats, vegetables, some fruit, and other animal products and stuff like that, and you're eliminating grains, legumes, and dairy, and then processed foods, including sugar. So you can see people go, oh, well, what can you even eat? You can eat 2 or 3 pages worth of stuff. So you'll see that there are all sorts of things on here, like beets. Beets are actually very sweet. And one of the problems, so that if you're eating a lot of sugar, especially processed sugar, you're going to find that like beets taste like dirt. So this is a great, this is a great way to see, are you sugar addicted? If you think that beets taste like dirt, I know you consume too much sugar.
Yes.
Period, full stop. Because beets are actually very sweet, but if you're used to having what we call a hyper-palatable palate, like you're eating white, mushy things that are very sweet, like breads, pastas, everything that's, all the kids' foods, etc., they're going to be hyper sweet. So then you can't really taste the sweet that's in a beet. So
sweet beet.
Yeah, carrots too. If you think carrots are meh, like unless you're buying GMO, because if you're buying GMO, we'll talk about GMOs another day. They don't tend to taste as good, but if you're buying organic carrots, they should be very sweet. And if you don't think so, again, you're eating too much sugar. So there are all those. So this is everything you can eat. Sweet potatoes right here, as you can see. Yams is another way of saying sweet potatoes.
Right. And related to sweet potatoes, almost the same thing. I'll go back up for a second. Oh. Thomas, you will be relieved to know that alligator is on the list. You may eat that alligator if you'd like to.
If you want to.
No. And Dawn, I know you're not allergic to ostrich. It's the only food on the planet you're not allergic to. So you can go ahead and eat that.
Exactly. So then over here, I'll kill you. So what you'll see.
Why does anyone like us?
When we get to the fruit section, when you're in the fruit section, you'll see the preferred fruits are like blackberries, blueberries, cranberries, raspberries. I'm skipping the ones I know you're not eating. So these are preferred because blackberries, blueberries, and raspberries and cranberries have a lot of fiber in them. You know, when you bite into them and they get in your teeth, that's the fiber. So
try biting into a raw cranberry. You'll discover how much fiber is in that.
Exactly. So if you're going to eat fruit, these are the ones to eat. So that if you're going to do a shake, you want to add these. Bananas and stuff like that, all these other fruits, they're in the other fruits column because you shouldn't be eating a ton of them. And if you do, only eat them in season, only eat it in moderation, because these all have more sugar in them. And think about it, you're like, oh yeah, these are all, like, bananas are one of the sugariest fruits you can eat. Like when people are like, I'm trying to lose weight, so I'm putting bananas in my shakes. I'm like, why are you even bothering? Why?
Right.
I love strawberries, but strawberries are they're not as fibrous as the other berries, so they're more sugar.
Yep. Just as a quick aside, looking right here, because we have the list of healthy fats and oils, you can take a quick look at that. And those are, we keep talking about the healthy oils, healthy fats. You see how short a list that is. That's what they are. Exactly.
And then under the in moderation, Primal doesn't have as big a problem with dairy, but you can see that they've limited it to 100% full fat cream because you want that fat. You don't want it to be all sugar, cheese, and some yogurt. If you have a problem with it, we recommend not doing that kind of stuff. Like I'm lactose intolerant, so I will not eat a lot of this stuff. The only thing I can really have is hard cheese because it doesn't have as much of the sugar in it. It's because of its processing. So those are the types of things that you want to be doing, is to keep it as low sugar as possible. So that is one of the reasons why we are very pro primal and paleo. Again, the main difference between the two of those diets is paleo is strictly no dairy. Primal is some dairy if you can tolerate it and you want to. You don't have to. All right, there we go. Sorry, we're having a lighting issue. All right, I'm going to bring you back. Boom. There we go. Good. All right, cool. So that is what carbs are okay. So what carbs aren't okay, Steve?
What carbs aren't okay? All the others.
All the others. Bread, pasta, fruit roll-ups, Soda, all soda. It doesn't matter if it's
Yeah.
organic soda, it's still soda.
Yeah.
All of these things are super high in sugar, and just you don't need them to live. I'm
Right.
sorry.
Right. Crackers, cookie. You know, some of these are obvious. If I say cupcakes, cakes,
Everybody
Twinkies,
knows that.
you know that. Some things that may be a little left of center.
Lara bars.
Right. You got to be careful because they sell themselves as being really healthy, and they're not. Nature Valley granola bars. Oh my God. Oh my God. They tick off every box you have. You say what's bad for you? Processed food. They're made in a factory. Sugar content. I did a comparison once for a client, and we found that the sugar content of Nature Valley granola bar was equivalent to the sugar content of a Twinkie. Yeah.
Yeah, you get when you start looking at these things, you'll be like, oh yikes, because there's not a lot of rules to the marketing.
No, there's not.
No.
I can call something healthy. There's a lot of code words for healthy, like wholesome.
Yeah, and natural. Natural means nothing.
Wholesome.
Yeah, I had to do a whole project when I was getting my degree in nutrition, and they said find a health food that markets itself as having some sort of health claim that has greater than 12 ingredients, and write the paper on it. And I chose those Bolthouse Farms drinks, if you've seen them, like the green drink and stuff. I went with the coffee flavored one, and it was horrifying. First of all, it had as much, if not more, sugar than a Coke.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it had some other crazy stuff in it, which is linked to cancer.
Yeah.
So at that point, just have your Coke
Right.
if you're gonna do it.
We do. I do this with clients. We do a shopping trip for to teach people like what part of the store to buy things in, and we stop because the Bolthouse Farm and are in the produce section.
They've done a very good job
They
marketing.
did a great job. So they put themselves in the produce section to fool you that they must be some kind of produce. And there's one called Green Goddess, which is like, it's green and it's
gross.
You swear to God, it looks so disgusting, it must be good for you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's 27 grams of protein per 5-ounce serving, which is, Coke is 26 grams per 12-ounce.
Protein, he meant carbs, sorry.
Excuse me, carbs. Yeah, sugar. And Coke is 26 grams per 12-ounce serving. Coke has ounce for ounce less sugar than Bolthouse Farms Green Goddess does.
Yeah. So you got to be really careful when you're looking at these things. And it's one of the reasons why when someone starts to change the diet, they go, well, can I have X, Y, and Z? And it's like, is it on that 2-page shopping list that we just showed you? No, then don't eat it. It's easier than having to do all this comparison.
I gave
shopping.
you alligator. What more do you want?
Exactly. But because
Thomas.
a rule of thumb is if it comes in a box, in a bag, in a can, in a tin, in a bottle, it's probably not good for you.
But if you trapped it yourself in the backyard, it's fine.
It's fine. It's like,
If you found it dead on the road, you can eat it.
I mean, technically. But yeah, so that is why we're very pro-primal and paleo.
I'm getting over food poisoning.
Yes. But so along that line, it's one of the, so then, okay, like, well, we don't want sugar, so what about vegetarianism? Well, glad you asked.
Okay.
We call those people carbotarians or pastatarians.
Often. So
I was a potato-tarian when I was a vegetarian. I didn't, because if you're going to be a vegetarian, you need to eat vegetables. Potatoes, yes, are a root vegetable, so I was closer, but pasta is not. It's a grain.
it's processed grain.
And it's a processed grain. And as we just said, if processed foods are bad, then they are bad, even if they are healthy, organic, natural, blah, 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 blah. They're still
never
processed.
Forget, the very first and oldest form of processed food was bread.
Mm-hmm.
Bread is a processed food, right?
It was different back in the day.
Sure.
So we'll give you that.
Made from better raw materials and made with fewer steps and stuff. It used to be grain, grind,
it still had
flour,
stones
baked.
in it, you know. Your
twigs,
fiber.
twigs and rocks for fiber. But you can't eat grains off the stalk. You will actually make yourself sick. You can't. They have to be processed for us to eat them. So they're already anti-ancestral. If you can't eat it raw, and I know the first thing that people, when I say that, if you can't eat it raw, well, you can't eat meat raw. Well, yeah,
I mean, technically you can.
You can eat meat raw. You may find it unpalatable because that's how you were raised. That's how you've been taught to think. But there are sushi is
It's
uncooked,
disgusting.
and a lot of people eat it. Even meat, steak tartare, one of my favorite things.
Give me that burnt burger. I'm good.
Even Western culture has a tradition of eating less cooked raw meat. The only thing about it is you've been taught that it's gross.
And you have to be a little more careful for like food poisoning. But apparently cooking it doesn't matter. So.
Cooking it doesn't seem to make a lot of difference, as it turns out.
Yeah,
I should have a raw burger.
For those who just joined us, we had food poisoning yesterday.
Yes.
So we're not really pro this cooking thing. It doesn't obviously make a difference.
But yeah, the more processes food needs in order to be editable, the less likely you should be eating it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's all like at the end of the day, things are supposed to be simple. Like they shouldn't really be that hard. Like it's, like it should be intuitive, and think about how we used to eat and stuff like that. It's just once it starts to get more complicated, like again, going back to my dad's organic brownies. I love you, Mom and Dad. But they're still brownies. You're still doing this whole process. You're still making them. They're still brownies. We'll do another one on frankenfood because it's a frankenfood. It's not something you should be eating. Like vegan corn dogs and stuff like that. Just eat a corn dog if you're gonna do it.
Or just, if you're going to be vegan, by the way, people make the decision to be vegetarian or vegan for a lot of reasons. Mm-hmm. If your reason is health, call us. We'll share some stories with you. If it's ethical, because you don't like to see animals killed, I support you. If it's religious and your faith says don't eat it, okay, I support that. But for health, vegetarian diets have to be extremely carefully metered, and you have to find a way to you got to sprout your beans if you want them to be protein. You have to sprout your beans, ferment your beans, wash your beans, keep them overnight. There's a lot of processes. You can't just open a can of beans and eat those. The protein that's in them is out of every 10 grams of protein, you're absorbing a half a gram. That means you have to literally eat a hill of beans to get the same protein that's in maybe one egg. So just eat an egg.
And again, going back to just like intuitiveness, like if you had to eat this many beans, but you could eat one egg, who's going to live? I don't have to, if I'm hunting and gathering, I don't have time to eat this many beans.
And again, back to what we said a minute ago, find any bean in its natural state. It is inedible. Mm-hmm. It has to be processed to be eaten. So already it's ancestrally suspect. My biggest challenge with vegetarians, and by the way, this comes from my experience being a vegetarian. I did it for a while.
I did it for over 3 years.
I was never fatter, and I was never sicker than when I went vegetarian.
Yeah, it broke my metabolism, and I ended up with strep, and then mono, and then strep on top of the mono, and I was like, I got to do something different. Yeah.
My rheumatoid arthritis was not caused by vegetarianism. I had that, Lucas. I had that already, but I went vegetarian at the suggestion of a doctor, and it made the RA so much worse. We did the McDougall starch-based diet, and I was close to 195 pounds. I'm 185 or so now. I was close to 10 pounds heavier than I am right now, and it was.
And this is with actually having fun and not eating super well.
Right. Right. I am off. I'm about 5 pounds heavier than I really should be, but I was heavy. I was tired. I was sore. I was sick, and I. You guys know me. I'm very strict. You give me a discipline, and I will follow it. That's my personality. That's how I am. I followed this thing to a T, and it just made me sicker and sicker and sicker. Because then my exploration began, and I realized that you really need animal protein and some animal fat to survive. Absolutely, eschewing that from your diet is ultimately not healthy.
Yeah, one of the things that, aside from being very sick my first year of chiropractic school, I started learning acupuncture medicine theory. And when I started learning it and learning like food energetics and all this other stuff, I was like, I can't be vegetarian anymore. This isn't natural and it's not healthy. And I could see that what little I knew about Chinese medicine at that point, I was like, I can't do this. It's not good for my body type. And I did the body fat meter where you hold on to it and it tells you the percentage of body fat. It was worse than I am now.
Oh, no.
And I think I was like 32%, and it was horrifying because I was like 120 pounds. And for 5'3", that's good. But I was what they call skinny fat, which is actually what a lot of women are, is we're skinny fat. So you may not weigh a lot, but most of your body percentage is fat, which isn't good. It's supposed to be within a certain range, and you can Google it, like body fat percentage, and you got to do it for your age because it does change over time. And I was only like 23 at the time, and I was like, I can't be like this. This isn't good. So that's how I started adding meat back into my diet, and I started to do a lot better. I actually lost weight, and I gained muscle, so I gained weight, but my body fat percentage went down. And that's one of the reasons why we don't hyper focus on the weight number, and we don't really care about BMI, because it doesn't account for the percentages. It doesn't count for like these other things. Because if you're very dense, like with muscle, like Steve is, you're going to weigh more, so your BMI is going to show that you're obese when you're really just muscular. So there you go. So then we'll wrap this up because it's gone a little longer than we thought. We knew this was going to happen. This is the sugar talk. But then as far as like what can I do? Well, first is
Stop eating.
Stop eating sugar. The first step for everybody who needs it is get rid of the processed crap first. That's the best investment in yourself, is to get rid of the crap. Like if you drink soda, stop. If you're eating a lot of baked goods, stop. Like just, if you're like us and you feel bad throwing stuff out, eat it down. Don't rebuy it.
Donate it to a food pantry.
Donate it. Yeah. You're killing someone else. Good job. But I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. But if you can get it out of your house, don't eat it if you don't have to. But stop buying that stuff, because I find it's a lot easier to resist stuff when I'm at the store than when I'm at home at night.
Pop-Tarts?
Yeah, like if it's an abnormal color, shape, or smell or whatever, like what? Like if it's purple or blue, it's your body thinks it's poison anyway. That's what those colors mean.
So
But
Pop Rocks are not a mineral supplement?
exactly. If you have children, not that anyone here does. The best thing you can do is try to get them off of sugar, get them away from these things. They're gonna encounter it, and there's only so much you can do, so don't kill yourselves or them. But the less that they have, the better, because it does affect their development.
Sure.
And then the other thing is, especially with kids' products, they are also filled with a lot of preservatives and dyes and additives, which can cause like ADHD and other like neurological problems. So they're not ideal, because that's one of the problems. It's not like sugars alone. It's usually with culprits. It's like with a little gang.
So, henchmen.
Exactly. So if you can get rid of that crap, that's good. And then, like, I wouldn't worry, like, having a piece of watermelon, don't worry about the watermelon if you're drinking Coke. You know what I mean? So, like,
Right.
Start with the bigger things that can make the biggest impact, and then work on it until you get it dialed down.
I think it's fair to tell everybody, when it comes to fruit, we have a little fruit in the house, and generally after a dinner we'll have a piece of fruit or two.
Or it goes moldy and we throw it out.
That too. We try to have a piece of fruit with evening meals, just to have something sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry about fruit.
And don't worry about fruit.
Like, if you're having 6 bananas a day, that's a problem.
Yeah, like I would, and also if you're doing smoothies, again, we're very pro eating your food, not drinking your food. If you're constantly drinking your food, unless it's like one of our good quality shakes that are low in sugar, but if you're doing like those commercial things where you have to mix in a banana to make it tolerable, like the amount of fruit you're probably putting in the shake is nullifying the reason of taking it.
Right. Remember what we said about glycemic index. The harder it is to digest, the more it abates the sugar. Liquid is the easiest thing to digest. That's why sodas are so bad, because it's liquid sugar, so it gets right into the bloodstream. The same with your smoothie. Whatever else is in your smoothie, if there's a sugar content in your smoothie, it's going straight to the bloodstream, and it's not as healthy. It doesn't matter how gross it tastes. It's still probably pretty high in sugar.
Exactly. So along that line, diet is the key when it comes to sugar, because we have a lot of digestive supplements. We have some that help with managing blood sugar. But if you don't change how you're eating, it's like pushing a boulder uphill. Why? It's just a lot of money that you're wasting. I mean, it's better than nothing, I guess, but if you're having a blood sugar issue, I can give you a couple products all day long, but you need to decrease that. And then along that line, if you're on like medications that are supposed to keep your blood sugar down, what can happen, as my dad has been experiencing, is that when you stop consuming that much sugar, when you're on sugar suppressants, it can actually decrease your blood sugar so much that you start to have hypoglycemia symptoms, right, like shakiness and tiredness, because you're not handling the sugar well. And so what's happening is that you're constantly up. So it's like pushing it down, and you stop pushing it. It's like boom.
The pre-diabetic or diabetic supplements, medications assume elevated blood sugar. So
and they assume you're just going to keep doing it.
Right. If you change your habits and lower your blood sugar, well, they're just going to push it down below healthy levels.
Yeah, you need some blood sugar, but yeah.
See your doctor.
Yeah, see your doctor. Like I can't tell you because I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not allowed to take people off supplements because I'm not allowed to, I'm a
karate instructor, so I am.
Yeah, so talk to your doctor about coming off your medications, but it can be a little rough, especially if you've progressed farther along the line. If you can catch this blood sugar stuff earlier rather than later, it's a lot easier.
Right.
But it's definitely
just know
doable.
that if you drastically change your diet the way that we're suggesting, and you are on any sugar handling medications, just check with your doctor.
Yeah, let them know what you're doing.
Yeah,
and if you've got a doctor who doesn't want to take you off your meds, like you should find a new doctor.
Call us.
Yeah, like there's so many doctors
us
in the world, and if a doctor is not willing to work with you to reduce your medications, and you want to get off medications and they don't care to help you, find a new doctor.
Right.
Because this is for people who aren't in our state, who are not working with us.
Right. We maintain a list of what's called the primal diet doctor network. Mm-hmm. So we know doctors who are aligned with our mission and who will be able to help you. If this is the life path and diet path you choose to go on, we can get you in touch with medical doctors who are really good with what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because most medical doctors do not get any real nutrition training, so they don't really get it. And when you tell them what you're doing, sometimes they get concerned because they just don't understand it.
Right. And they assume you're going to fail.
And they assume you're going to fail, exactly. So if they don't have confidence in you, But
slap that guy.
Exactly. So along that line, does anybody have any questions for us? Because we're going to wrap this stuff up. All right, good. All right. Well, then we'll let all of you guys go. Thank you for joining us. I hope you guys learned a lot and had some fun. Next week on July 7th, we are going to go over the immune-killing foods. So it'll be a little bit of a repeat of this stuff, obviously, but there's some other things we can throw in there too.
Hey, Kath.
Did you guys have any questions?
Folding sheets. No, actually, the more I listened, the more questions were answered. So I
Yay!
didn't.
That was our goal. So
we try to be comprehensive.
yeah, I know this went a little bit longer, but it's more.
You did a good job.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank you. Yeah, we didn't even get into fructose and liver disease. That'll be another time.
Metabolic syndrome.
Exactly.
Another day.
It's so much, but thank you guys for joining us. We hope you had fun. We hope you learned a lot, and we'll see you next time.